Okay, good morning. We're on 80A4, the bottom of Pei Amud Aleph, all the way on the bottom. Lema Misayele. So Shmuel told us that you are allowed to go ahead and set up the Eruv, even without anyone's, without the participants' knowledge, without their consent. You're allowed to go ahead and set something up against their will. So the Gemara wants to bring a proof to Shmuel's view over here that when they're...
Why would that even be a question? I'm sort of surprised by that.
Well, over here, we're basically, a couple of things. First of all, we're taking something from the person. That's a tremendous novelty. But even if, what's even more novel, what's truly even more novel is that, what is the concept of an Eruv? The concept of an Eruv is that that I am agreeing to a partnership over here. Yeah. And how can you make a partnership with someone?
The person can agree to the partnership after you put the lechi up.
Well, we're about to discuss the lechi in a second, but the point is that without a lechi, let's say we share a courtyard, and you're saying, I don't want to be part of it. And we say, no, against your will, you're part of it. What does that even mean? How can that work? Right? That's a tremendous novelty. Tremendous novelty. Okay, so we're going to bring a proof from a lechi. We compel a resident of the mavoi to participate in the construction of the lechi or the korah for the mavoi. Again, the lechi is the piece on the side of the door, right? So you have a doorway at the front of the alleyway. So the lechi is the small little piece of wood that sticks out, juts out over here. The korah is the one that goes on top. We force the person. So Gemara says, is this a proof to Shmuel's view? Now we're on Pei Amud Beis, 80B1. Shani Hasan, Gemara says, no proof. First of all, for two reasons. One, deleka mechitzos, for there are no partitions. Okay, these words are a little cryptic and there's different explanations, but the way we'll explain it, based on Tosfos, is that the difference is as follows. And exactly what we just discussed with Jesse, and that is that when it comes to partnership, you have to say, like, I am sharing my space with you. Right? It's like, in other words, if I don't share my space with you, how do we, to go ahead and compel someone to do that, that's novelty. But a lechi is a technical thing. In other words, if there is a lechi here, let's say there was a lechi that was constructed naturally. It just blew in the wind, and there's a lechi that's on the thing that's just standing there. There's a lechi. In other words, you don't need the same level of consent for it to work. And therefore, if we force the person, their willingness is not there, but the lechi's there, doesn't really matter.
The reason I asked the question is if somebody's putting a piece of wood on the side of his door, so big deal. It's not part of it's
exactly.
Not,
Exactly. That's the Gemara's answer. The Gemara's answer.
Exactly why I asked the question.
Right. Okay, and that's the Gemara's point. The Gemara is saying, don't bring me a proof from a lechi or a korah, because that is completely dissimilar to the case of a chatzar. Because there, someone puts it up. At the end of the day, there is now a wall. That's all you need. All you need is a wall, meaning that little piece of wood. But when it comes to partnership, partnership means consent, partnership means willingness, and therefore there's no proof. Alternatively, lishnachrina mitzad shani. Okay, these words, all the commentators change. Okay, they say that there must have been a typo over here. Isn't that crazy? They basically, almost virtually all the commentators say there must be a typo over here, because these words make absolutely no sense, and they understand that the word mitzad should actually read based in shani. It should be like a mem should be a base. Okay, that's not crazy. Tzadi should be like those two dots, those two lines, and a shan. Okay, and dalad. So based in shani, meaning that the brisa that said you force the person for the lechi or the korah is talking about a case where based in intervenes and compels the person to do so, as opposed to our case, we're talking about doing so without the involvement of based in. What that means is that in general, based in not nowadays, but when you had a city which was you had a situation when the based in was really empowered, if based in chooses to do something financially, they could compel someone to do something. Okay, so based in's able to get involved, and that would be different than our case where there was no based in involvement. Okay, one way or another, there is no proof to Shmuel's view, and that's where we leave the discussion. Itzbar. Now another halacha, not so relevant to us nowadays. Rav Chia bar Ashi Amar, Osin lechi ashera. A person's allowed to make a lechi from the wood of an ashera tree, even though you're not allowed to benefit from the wood. Okay, so again, which one's the lechi? The lechi is the one on the side on the doorpost. Okay, so you're allowed to make, even though generally you're not allowed to benefit from this wood, you're allowed to make a lechi from the wood of an ashera tree. Rav Shimon Lakish Amar Osin Korah Ashera. You're also allowed to make a korah for the ashera. Now the korah, keep in mind, has to be a certain width. It has to be wide enough. If you remember, how wide? Okay, has to be wide enough they could hold up a brick. Okay, so they talk about it being a tefach, whatever it is, but basically it has to be wide enough they could hold up a brick. But it has to be a certain width. Okay, so it says the Gemara now. Madamar Korah, Rav Shimon Lakish, who said that has to be the width of a, to hold that it could be the width of that it could be used for a Korah. Kol shkein lechi, for sure it's allowed to be used for a lechi. Umadamar lechi, however, Rav Chia bar Ashi said that it's a lechi, aval korah lo, but to be made for Korah, that cannot be done. Why? Kituse michtas shiure, because the measurement is pulverized. What that means is as follows. In other words, when something is aser behana, when something cannot be benefited from, it's not just, what's the halacha with an asher tree? If you have an asher tree, you are obligated to go ahead and destroy it. So when a person's using it, so there's an argument to be made that granted it may be able to be used in certain circumstances, but basically we see it as almost non-existent. Maybe you could use it, but we don't see it as its full shear. Okay, but this comes up in a couple places with the shear trees. Okay, so basically when it comes to lechi, there is no shear for lechi. As long as there's any minuscule thing there, it's good. And therefore, even if it's pulverized dust, something sticking out, you're good to go. So the one who says it can be used for lechi, granted, they say it can be used for lechi, but that opinion may not say it can be used for korah, because to use for korah has to be a certain width. So granted, physically it has this width, but since halachically, if you were wearing halachic glasses, we'd say, oh, this thing has to be destroyed. And therefore, it's not as wide as it could hold a brick. It's something which, granted, right now, physically it's that wide, but at the end of the day, since you're obligated to go ahead and destroy it and pulverize it, it's really not that wide. You with me? In other words, it's a bit of a novel idea, but the point is that since halachically since you're obligated to go ahead and destroy it, you can't say it's wide enough that it's going to hold a brick because it has to be destroyed. And therefore, the one who says lechi may not hold korah because of that reason. The one who holds korah, Rav Shimon Lakish, would say if you hold korah, that even though it has to be destroyed, it could still be a good korah. Certainly would hold it could be used for a lechi. Okay, says the Mishnah, starting a new halacha. Nismai tochel. Okay, so let's say there's shitufim avos or Eruvin chatzeros, and there's food sitting in one person's house. There's food sitting in my house, let's say, and I realized that the food became diminished. I don't know, my kid snacked on it. Some mice, I don't know, got to it. Whatever it is, the bottom line is there is not the measurement of food. We're going to talk about what the measurement is in a moment. So mosif umizake vein tzarich lodia. I'm allowed to add my own food. And I'm able to pick it up, right, on behalf of everyone else. We're all part of a good thing, and the food diminished. So I say, I don't have enough food over here. So I go take some other food from my cupboard, and I lift it up on your behalf. I don't have to tell you that I'm using your food now. In other words, right? So basically, what's happening is there's not enough food now. So I go ahead and take my own food, and I say I'm lifting this up on behalf of you, all of you are part of my courtyard, and then I put it in the pile. I don't have to tell you that I just acquired food on your behalf. Makes sense? Okay. Fine. Nitosva land. Let's say new people moved in. Let's say there was only 5 of us living in this courtyard, and then a 6th person moved in. Most of them is zaki. Again, I could add my own food. So now, and we're going to need, because of the 6th person, I'm going to have to add more food. Okay, there's not enough food. We only told him we had enough food for 5 people, but now there's a 6th person. I'm going to have to add food. Okay, so I'm allowed to go ahead and confer ownership to the new residents. But here I need that person's permission that food could be used for this purpose, for the Eruvin chatzeros or the shitufim avos. Why? Because in the situation, in case number 1, all 5 of us were part of a courtyard, part of and we all agreed, and now you all agreed that you want the food that belongs to you to be shared with one another, right? And then it starts to diminish. Okay, so we say, okay, so it starts to diminish, but I know that you all want to be partners, right? So I go ahead, I acquire more food on your behalf. I say, okay, here's some of my food. I'm making it all to you. I don't need to ask you permission that you want to share this food. I know you want to share this food because we've already had this discussion. 5 weeks ago, you all agreed that we're going to have this partnership. But if there's a new member, okay, a 6th person moves in, and I acquire food on his behalf, right? So there I have to ask the person, do you want to be a part of this, right? Even if I've given him the food, right? I've said, okay, I'm acquiring this food on your behalf. But he has to acquiesce to the partnership. He has to be interested in the partnership. Without that, it's not going to be a good partnership. And therefore, when there's someone new and I'm acquiring food on his behalf, I have to get that person's permission. Okay? 80b2. Kate Kamahu Shirin, what is the measurement? What is the minimal measurement for the food? Okay, so Bisman Shema Reuben, when there are a lot of people in the courtyard, Mizon Shtei Sudas Lekulam, then all you need is 2 meals for one person. Okay, we'll talk about what that measurement is. In other words, you don't have to have a meal for each person, right? Imagine, again, Eruvin chatzeros in Baltimore, right? Imagine the amount of food that'd be sitting in like the good or whatever it is. It'd be crazy. 2 meals for one person, whatever that amount is, that's sufficient. Bisman shemuatin, when there's less than that, then you could get away with less food. What is that? You would have the equivalent of a dried fig for each person, right? So if there's 6 of us, then we would just need 6 dried figs. Okay? If there's 18, or we'll say 18 or more, then you could get away. Then you don't have to keep on having a measurement for everyone. All you need is, Chazal said, we cap it at like a family rate, right? We cap it at a certain amount. Yeah.
Why?
Because it'd be crazy. Imagine you have a chutzner with, 100 people, or a city with, 20,000 people, whatever amount of people. Imagine the amount of food we'd be stockpiling in order to make.
Why do you need so much when it's a small number? Why?
No, it's less. Meaning the point is, it has to be something which is seen as a meaningful contribution by each person, right? So therefore, so meaning each of us have to contribute a meaningful amount, but there's going to be a cap. When we hit 18, we'll see why we get to 18, but the point is when we hit 18, and we say, okay, we're done. Because you can't keep on going and going and going. It's just going to be too much. So Chazal said, a family rate, we stop, we cap it at a certain point. But a grogreris, a dried fig, that's always seen as a significant, on Yom Kippur or whatever it is, that's the amount of food.
Is this based upon logic, or is there a pasuk that...
There's no pasuk because again, this is based on Chazal. But if you want his pasuk, ikar grogreres is the biblical amount that is seen as a satiating amount of food.
I mean, I hate to be.
No. I'm answering your question.
This
So
all seems.
Again, these are hashar. These
if
are.
I were in yeshiva, they'd probably tell me where all this stuff came from, right?
I hear you should go back to yeshiva. When are you retiring? Okay, let's go. So what's it called? So the point is that again, a grogreres is the amount that is satiating halachically, biblically, midoraisa, and therefore, if we want to give a meaningful amount, a grogreres would be a dried fig would be a meaningful amount. But we're going to understand that there's going to be, and this is going to be a human, divinely inspired, but human decision. At some point, we're just going to cap it because we cannot have thousands of people contributing the grogreres. That would be insane. Okay, fine. Sorry. So there is some discussion. Do they have to make a new one each week? Are they going to eat it in the week? It's pretty clear that they were probably eating it back in the day. Nowadays we don't eat it. Okay, discussion about Bal Tashchis is only going to really be a longer discussion about what Bal Tashchis is. But if you're using food for the sake of a mitzvah, for the sake of doing something, then that's not Bal Tashchis. In other words, Bal Tashchis is when I'm misusing food, misapportioning food, misappropriating food. But if I'm using it for a meaningful thing. Even if it's not going to be eaten, that's not necessarily Bal Tashchis. I'm trying to think of there's customs. I'm trying to think of a relevant custom. Okay, there's even let's say before Pesach, when we go ahead and hide 10 pieces of bread, right? What are you doing? You're wasting that bread. You're going to go and burn that bread. Meaning, it makes sense. The bread, that leftover pizza that you have, okay, fine, that you should burn. But you're going to go ahead and take a loaf of bread and I start breaking it up. What am I doing? No. If for the sake of a minhag, something lofty, that's not considered Bal Tashchis. Yeah.
I'm sorry for going back, but surely there's somebody inside the Eruv, a Jewish guy inside the Eruv, who surely doesn't want to be a member of the Eruv. So why can't we have an Eruv?
Why can we have an Eruv? So, first of all, I'm not sure if that's true. Why do you say? I mean, if it's someone who's not...
Somebody who's not from. We said, he's going to drive his car. He's going to do whatever he's going to do.
Right. So again, keep in mind, what we're doing... So we did have a discussion earlier about the person who is doesn't believe in the Eruv. That person we treat like a non-Jew in this respect. And what we do is that's where the leasing comes in. In other words, there is a leasing that takes place from the city. There will be a question, can I go into that person's house carrying something for that reason? But yeah, if someone is really, is basically saying that I do not believe in this, therefore does not want to be part of it, therefore we go ahead, and again, whether it's someone who is opposed to the Eruv, for hashkafic reasons, or because the fact that they're not Jew, or someone who's not Jewish, we rent from the mayor, the governor, the police chief, whatever it is, so that we cover our bases on that end. That allows, again, walk through the streets, but it's not so simple. It's really, there is a massive machlokas and a good argument to be made. You cannot walk into a irreligious person's house on Shabbos carrying something for this reason. Okay. Rav Yossi says, when is this? Rav Yossi says, when is this so that these measurements are true? That's only the beginning of the Eruv. Once you set up an Eruv, and Rav Yossi over here seems to be arguing with the Tanna Kama. The Tanna Kama said that every Shabbos you have to go into the Eruv, you have to go into Shabbos with the required amount. Rav Yossi seems to be saying that, right, and that's why we're talking about if it diminishes, you have to add on. Rav Yossi says that no. Once you start the Eruv, then you have, with the right amount, you're good to go. Once the Eruv was set up, let's say you set up an Eruv, and we say we're going to do this, guys, we're all living in a courtyard, we're going to set this up for the next, 2 years. Guys, we're going to do this for the next 2 years, fantastic. Right, therefore, if all that's left over is just a small amount, that's fine. Fine. And now a last line, which we discussed before, we're going to discuss again later, but Chachamim said that you have to do an Erev Chatzeros even after they did a Shituf, right? What's the difference between Shituf and an Erev Chatzeros? Shituf is if we have courtyard, and street in the middle, that's Shituf Mavos. So once we do Shituf, what is Shituf Mavos? That means there's a partnership between all of us. We all contribute food, we're all partners. So one have to also do Erev Chatzeros. Why? To teach the children about what Erev Chatzeros is, because children will not realize that when a situation where you don't have Shituf Mavos, they'll think, we don't have a street, so therefore we can carry in a courtyard. No. In order to ensure that they remind themselves that there is something about carrying within a courtyard alone, they do therefore also have Shituf Mavos. Says the Gemara, The Gemara says, the first case, where it says the food comes diminished, what's the case? If we're talking about one type of food, then why does the Mishnah mention only the case of the diminishing amount of food, implying there's still a little bit left? Afilu kalanami. Even if food was completely consumed, then you're also allowed to replenish the shituf without their knowledge. Again, the opening line of the Mishnah said that when the eruv starts to diminish, then I'm allowed to go and give food to all of you without telling you, and I'm allowed to bring that, basically acquire food on your behalf and say, okay, I'm adding it to the eruv. But as we're going to see from Mishnah, if I'm using the same type of produce, same type of food, I don't even have to ask you permission. Even if it gets completely diminished, I don't have to ask your permission. El b'shnei minim, and if we're talking about two types of foods, I feel nisma'it nami lo. Then even if it gets diminished, I should not be allowed to do anything without your permission. Okay, the Tanya is taught in the Brisa. Kala ochel min echad. The Brisa says if the sheet of food or the air of food is completely consumed, from the same type of food, I don't have to notify the other residents. And basically I'm allowed, so in other words, let's say we had an eruv made up of matzah, okay? And the matzah gets diminished, someone got hungry, and so I say, oh my, the matzah is diminished, I want to go add another piece of matzah. I acquired on your behalf, says the Mishnah, and the matzah gets completely diminished, someone ate all the matzah, okay? I'm allowed to go ahead and take two pieces of matzah and say, I'm doing this on your behalf, and I don't have to tell you at all. Okay? And yet our Mishnah said, what did our Mishnah say? Our Mishnah said that only in a case where it was nisma'it, when it got diminished, when there was only one matzah left, implying that if it was completely consumed, it would not work, right? And then b'shnei minim, if it's two types of food, let's say it was, if it's a different type of food, let's say there was matzah, and I want to, restock it with grape juice, let's say. Okay, tzorach l'dia, there I have to notify you if anything gets diminished at all. And yet our Mishnah said that if it was diminished, I don't have to tell you. So basically, it doesn't fit. So Gemara says, "Ibay say min echad, v'imay say mishnei minim." We can have an answer according to each one. Ibay say min echad. If you want to say that we're talking about one type, 80b3 minus mate. What does it mean that it dwindled? Nismat mate. It does not mean that nisma'ate, where it got dwindled, but rather nismat mate, which means it got crumbled. In other words, it got completely consumed. And what the Mishnah is telling us is exactly that. The Mishnah is saying that you had matzah. It got completely consumed, it got crumbled, it got completely crushed, and nonetheless, you're allowed to contribute again matzah without telling anyone, okay? Or you could say that it's two types of foods, kala shani, okay? When the sheet is completely consumed, then you have to go ahead and get permission from the people. If I want to go ahead and use a different type of food, I have to ask all of you before starting that eruv again. But if it only got diminished, I don't have to ask you all again. Okay, bottom line is therefore it's not a contradiction. Okay, so says the Mishnah further, if more residents join, then I'm allowed to add food and give ownership to them. Okay, but the Mishnah said that if new residents join, then I have to get permission from those new residents to use food. Again, new residents, so there's 5 of us, so then Dr. Klaff walks in, and now he's a member of our Chatzar, welcome. Okay, so I'm allowed to go ahead and take matzah on his behalf, perfect timing, on his behalf, but I have to ask him, do you want this matzah to be part of it, right? And the Gemara says, this, our Mishnah argues with Rabbi Yehuda. Why? It's not, it was taught in the Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda said, when is this true, that I need his permission, that's only for Eruvin Tchumen that you need to get someone's permission. But when it comes to Eruvin Chatzeros, you don't need permission. Our Mishnah said, by Eruvin Chatzeros, you do need permission. So clearly, our Mishnah argues with Rabbi Yehuda. Gemara says, Pshita de Chalukim. Yeah, that's kind of obvious. It literally says explicitly, Rabbi Yehuda argues with our Mishnah. So, Ma'adatem, I would have thought, when is the ruling of our Mishnah true? When it is a courtyard between two mavos. Then we need the consent of the new residents. Because, why? Because in a situation where there's a courtyard, let's say there's our courtyard, and there's a street over here, and a street over here. So this guy has a choice which mavoi he wants to be a part of. There, we would say, I need his consent, right? But let's say there's only one courtyard and one street, where it's so obvious, Emalo, maybe there we wouldn't need his consent. It would always, we would be allowed to do it against his will. Kamash Malon, Rav Shishbi coming to tell us that our Mishnah is arguing with Rabbi Yehuda in both cases. It's not, his focus was Rabbi Yehuda. His focus is really the Rabbanan. Rabbi Yehuda says you always need permission. The Rabbanan say you don't need permission. Rabbi Yehuda says you don't need permission. Shlom Midas. The Rabbanan said you do need permission. When does the Rabbanan say you need permission? Not only in a case where we really don't know which which street does he want to be a part of? There, okay, we understand he needs permission. But maybe in a case where there's only one street, he for sure wants to be a part of it, Mashmalan, that Rav Shishbi was coming to teach us that in that case also he says you do need explicit permission if it's he's now joining the Eruv for the very first time. Okay, says the Gemara, 80b3, second column, Kamu Shiro, what is the measurement? Kamahu Merubin. So the Mishnah said that when it's a lot of people, then 2 meals is sufficient. So what does it mean, a lot of people? How many people? Shmona Esrei Bnei Adam. Okay, 18 people. Shmona Esrei V'Sulo. Ask the Gemara, 18 and no more? In other words, so if there's 19 people, then what happens then? So Gemara says, no, Ema Mishmona Esrei Ve'elach means 18 and up. Okay, we already explained the Mishnah this way. Umayshta Shmona Esrei D'Nakad, why 18 people? Rav Yitzchak, Rav Yehuda, Lidvim Farshli Menei B'Da'aba. Rav Yitzchak, son of Rav Yehuda, says, my father, Rav Yehuda, explained it to me. He said, Kol Shil Nechalkom Zon Shei Studus B'Neihen, if you were to divide the 2 meal equivalent between them, V'Magas Gres L'Chol Echad V'Echad, and there is not enough that each person gets a dried fig, again, dried fig being a meaningful amount of food, Hein Merubin, that's a lot of people, okay? Visagi Bizmon Shtei Studos, and a 2 meal equivalent would be okay, okay? Vilo, and if there are not that many participants, that if you were to divide 2 meals between them, then muwatzininu. Then it's a small amount and an equivalent of a dried fig. V'agav orchei kamash blan, the shtei sudas haven shmona esrei grogros, that 2 meals equivalent to 18 dried figs. Okay, so basically the 18 dried figs comes from the fact that there is a measurement. How much food, how much bread, let's say, how much matzah would feed, how much matzah would feed one person for 2 meals? 18 figs. Okay, and since 1 fig is what's needed for one person, so basically that's where the 18 comes from. That each person, if it's 7 of us, then we'd say, okay, fine. Then we're going to give each person gives a fig. If it's 10 of us, each person gives a fig. You get to 18, then that's equivalent of a fig for each. But once you then you hit 18, then you're no longer able to divide it into 18 pieces because then it's going to be too much. Therefore, you stop at the 2 meals. Once you hit a food for 2 meals, that's 18. Anything more than that, you just stick with that, the food for 2 meals, and that's going to be sufficient. Okay, let's start the Mishnah. Bekol ma'arvin mishtafin. Okay, we saw this already. We're going to ask why we need this new Mishnah again. But any food is allowed to be used for erev reshituf, chutz min hamayim and hamelach, with the exception of water and salt. Divrei Rabbi Eliezer. Those are the words of Rabbi Eliezer. Yeshua Omer, kikar hu erev. He says a whole loaf is an erev. Afilu ma'afei sa'ah, even if it's baked from a sa of flour, very small amount. V'prusa ema arvimba, but if it's slightly broken, if it is not a complete loaf of bread, you cannot make an erev with it. Okay, very interesting. Lecha Mishnah. Why do you need Lecha Mishnah? Gemara is going to deal with this. Lecha Mishnah by Hamotzi, we even have why we have, but certainly for an erev, seems very strange. It has to be a whole loaf of bread. We'll come back to it. Don't worry, the Gemara is going to ask. Okay, so, but if it's whole, then it's okay. Kikar be'isr, a loaf the size of an isr. Isr is a small coin. V'shalim arvimbo. Rabbi Yeshua is saying that even if you have a loaf which is very, very, very small, it's the size of a coin, but it's complete, it's whole, you're allowed to use it for an erev. But if it's very large and it's not whole, you're not allowed to make it for an erev. The Gemara, of course, is going to have to deal with what is the deal, why is that so? But we'll come back to that, God willing, tomorrow, 7:50. Okay. Have a great day. Good Yom Tov.